Thank you, Pam. Do you want to start the slides for me? Hello, everybody. Give us just a minute while we can get ourselves situated. Thank you, Pam. Pam is doing these slides from me from behind the scenes. I'm Dr. Terry Bullis. I'm a board member of CHAD, and I'm here to introduce Dr. Andrea Brenner tonight. But before we get to that, we wanted to tell you guys a little bit about our resource fair. October, as some of you may know, is the month where we do our annual resource fair. And it's looked a little differently over the past few years because, COVID kind of messed things up a little bit. But the model that we've begun to embrace is a series of free lectures every Tuesday of October. Normally, we offer a free lecture once a month through our CHAD channel here. But this month, it's almost every. We're not doing Halloween because we figured people are probably going to be busy. This is the second, actually, of our series of lectures. The first one occurred this past Saturday at our live exhibit hall, which was the kickoff of our resource fair. And tonight we have Dr. Brenner. Our next two upcoming lectures will be next week, where Dr. John Thomas will be speaking with us about ADHD in the workplace. So finding a great fit, career fit, interface, and resolution. And then finally, on October 24th, we have Dr. Michelle Mullally, and she's going to speak about the importance of assessing and treating anxiety and trauma in understanding ADHD symptoms. So I'll give you a little reminder of those at the end before we go. I do want to introduce our sponsors for the resource fair because we couldn't offer all of these free lectures or the free exhibit hall that we did on Saturday without our sponsors. So the first gold sponsor that we would like to just mention is Child and Adolescent Psychiatry. And they are a group that provides comprehensive clinical evaluations and medication management for children and adolescents with ADHD in the Northern Virginia area. And Dr. Paraneski, I think is her name, which is probably why she just goes with child and adolescent psychiatry. She is a double board certified psychiatrist. Next up for our gold sponsors, we have Pam. Would you mind forwarding to our next slide? Thank you so much. Cortona Academy. And Cortona Academy serves students grades 4 through 12, regardless of their label, applying what is now called brain training to all courses to allow students to focus and learn from highly trained expert teachers in a rewarding, pressure-free environment. They are also a gold sponsor. So thank you to Cortona. Fusion is a revolutionary private middle and high school serving 6th through 12th grade where positive relationships unlock academic potential. All courses are one-on-one, allowing teachers to customize curriculum and teaching for each student's individual strengths, interests, and learning style. They are also a gold sponsor. The McLean School. For 70 years, McLean School has helped kindergarten to grade 12 students realize their full potential with a comprehensive college preparatory curriculum that starts with an understanding of what our students can do, not for what they can't do. Thank you, McLean School. Thrive Emerge is the pioneer of comprehensive wraparound programming to help neurodiverse young adults and their families transition to independence. Since 2004, our mission has been to help older teens and young adults recover confidence and develop skills to succeed in life. And so here we have our silver sponsors. The first is Bass Educational Services. They're a full-service educational consulting group dedicated to the premise that learning differently should not be a barrier to academic success. Services include K through 12 school placement, ACT and SAT test prep, subject tutoring, ADHD and EF coaching, educational advising, as well as college, post-secondary, and gap year planning. And also Commonwealth Academy is a college preparatory school for students of average to gifted ability with ADHD, executive functioning challenges, and mild learning differences. Small class sizes and differentiated instruction make our inclusive, caring community an exemplar school. Thanks to those folks for being silver sponsors. Elevated Learning Solutions is a collaborative, holistic educational support company. All members of the team have backgrounds in special education. In addition to academic tutoring, they offer executive functioning coaching, IEP support and advocacy, psychoeducational testing, and summer enrichment programming. And in addition, we have Focus Collegiate, which provides dynamic, comprehensive support to college students who need more support than their college provides or who have learning differences. They deliver their comprehensive services in real time when and where their students need them. So thank you to both ELS and Focus Collegiate for being silver sponsors. Finally, there's Learning RX, and Learning RX offers cognition training for a wide range of learning and thinking skills with online and in-person training options. They design a one-of-a-kind training plan for every learner with plans available for kids, teens, adults, and individuals with learning differences. Thank you, Learning RX. And so I think we are ready to welcome Dr. Andrea Brenner. Dr. Andrea Brenner is the president of A.M. Brenner LLC and founder of the Talking College Card brand. She's a speaker and transition educator who brings 25 years as a college insider to her presentations for high school, college, young adult, and parent audiences. Andrea is co-author of How to College, What to Know Before You Go and When You're There, which is a student-facing book that guides students through their transition to college. She is also the creator of the Talking College Card decks, which provide insider tips and discussion prompts for college-bound students and their parents and guardians. Andrea works with many families of neurodivergent students. Her card deck, Talking College, College Ready, tips and discussion prompts designed for college-bound students with learning differences will be out next month and is available for pre-order at talkingcollege.com. We are very pleased to have Dr. Brenner here tonight to talk about how to adult, transitioning to college, and the great beyond. Welcome, Dr. Brenner. You are on mute, Dr. Brenner. Much better.
Okay, there we go. Thank you so much, everyone, for having me. I'm really excited to be here. And I am going to speak a little bit about how to adult, really what happens after college, and how those transitions are actually quite similar to the transitions that we had from high school to college. So let us dig in. So as it was mentioned, this is my background. I spent 25 years as what I would call a college insider. I'm a sociologist by training. I was a professor at American University for all 25 of those years, as well as a first-year administrator. And I studied sociology of the first-year student. I'm fascinated with the transitions of life, both from high school to college and beyond. And so in addition to writing this book, I work on these card decks to provide tactile resources to families. What I'm going to cover tonight in this talk, and excuse me if I do cough, I do have a little bit of a cold. What I'm going to cover in this talk tonight are the following. I want to talk about kind of considering jobs that work with the student's strengths and challenges. I'm going to talk about how to target employers who seek neurodiverse candidates. I'm going to talk a little bit about seeking support. How do you do it? Who to go to? And of course, not doing it alone. I want to also discuss how important it is to create a job application schedule, the importance of self-care in the job search process, not just for the young adults going through it, but also parents who might be helping them, how students and young adults should be really seeking help to hone some of those professional skills they haven't yet mastered, how best to work on interpersonal skills and why they're important, how to interview the interviewers, which is a really wonderful job searching skill. And finally, I'm going to focus a little bit on the parent's role in their child's job search process. But as we are dealing with young adults, I am actually going to be talking to the young adults. And when I say you, I'm referring to those young adults who will be transitioning out of college and into the job search process. And of course, our families can benefit from these talks as well. Every single time I give a talk, I start with the danger of a single story. If you are not familiar with Chimamanda Adichie's TED Talk called The Danger of a Single Story, it's probably the best 17 minutes you'll ever have. And it's absolutely imperative, I think, when we talk about neurodiverse young adults. And we really make sure that we don't hone in on one single story. Everybody's different. Some students come at a job search process with great social skills, but are lacking some other interpersonal skills or professional skills, while we have others who are, really nailing it socially, but have trouble with the executive functioning things. So there's lots and lots of different pieces, and there is no danger of a single story in the way that I like to tell a story. Okay, so let's begin with job searching. Job searching is an overwhelming and challenging experience, right? And it's challenging for all young adults, but it's especially challenging for any individual who's struggling to stay on task. So if we're talking about somebody with executive functioning challenges or processing challenges, those are absolutely people who can really, really find this time overwhelming. If you have, you yourself are overwhelmed by complex processes, or you have a child who's overwhelmed by complex processes, it's important to take a breath and know that the job search can be pretty overwhelming. So we're going to talk a little bit about number 2 here, which is knowing your deal breakers and your flexibilities. And I think this is really important. And it's important to kind of sit down and write them down. So if you are a young adult and you know for sure you want to work virtually, that that is a deal breaker for you. You are only comfortable if you are focusing independently in the workplace, and you want to do that virtually. That might be a deal breaker on your list. But at the same time, there might be flexibilities that you have, and maybe some flexibilities outside of your comfort zone. So you might go into the process saying, these are absolutely deal breakers for me. Either I need to work with people, I need to work alone, I need to have a job that starts at 9 a.m., or I can have a flexible schedule, whatever it might be. But I love when students and young adults can really kind of balance pushing themselves and also being realistic. So I think it's an important conversation for parents and guardians, anyone who's helping students and young adults who are heading into the job search process, to really figure out deal breakers and flexibilities. And one of the things I love to do is to tell families to sit down, and maybe a parent with their young adult, with 2 separate pieces of papers and 2 separate pens, and take a few minutes, maybe 10, 15 minutes by themselves. And that young adult writes down all of their deal breakers when it comes to the job search process. And the parent or guardian writes down what they believe the deal breaker should be for their child as well. And then you can really start sharing those lists. And sometimes those deal breakers will pop over to a flexibility list. So it's important to really talk about and think about. Also, and this is bullet number 3, it's important to remember that there are systematic limitations and there are blatant biases. And I, don't want to gloss over this. The world is not always friendly to those of us who are have some executive functioning challenges or some processing challenges. And blatant biases can really create barriers. So although we love a sort of a kumbaya approach to it, it's really important to be frank and be honest, and really knowing that, obtaining and looking for a job and obtaining a job and keeping a job, there's really a balance kind of between fighting for what's right and fighting for your mental health. So that's something to keep in mind. Things are sometimes quite unfair. That doesn't mean that you can't fight for what is, certainly yours, but also keep in mind that the process can be pretty overwhelming, and you should really keep in touch with your mental health. And then I would also argue to think bigger. Decide if this particular job search is a stepping stone, or are you actually looking for your dream job? most kids that are 18 to 25 years old are not happening into their dream job. They are in some type of stepping stone position. It might be an internship that's paid or unpaid. It might be an apprenticeship. It might be a part-time job. It might be a full-time job. But there is a big difference between a job and a career. And sometimes that's something that we forgot to tell our students, both in high school and in college, right? That we are actually looking for a job following college usually, rather than a career. We can be on a career path, but there will be many jobs that we pick and choose. And in that same vein, I think it's important, and parents can play a really big role in this, to kind of tell your job story to your kids and show them that it is rarely a linear path. It is rarely that I go to high school, I find an interest, I go to college, I study this particular subject area, and then I become a vet. Usually there is a winding road that is not completely linear, and that's okay. That's a really wonderful growth experience. So it's also important to consider varied types of jobs that will work best for your strengths and your challenges. So I mentioned earlier in-person, virtual, or hybrid positions. And again, those are things you might want to visit in that deal breaker or kind of looking outside of the box flexibility lists. Are you interested in being self-employed? And that's sometimes really challenging for someone with time management skills. Is entrepreneurship that maybe something for you, or maybe that's something for you part-time and you have another job that is also part-time that is in an office? What about designing your own environment? Is that something that excites you, something that scares you? And I think it's important to note that there are self-employment challenges, right? Many of us think it's so great to be self-employed, and it can be. But instability is a big one, right? It's really hard. Sometimes it's lonely, and sometimes there's a lack of support. So I think it's really important to talk about what we call job craft, which is focusing on the strengths, your own strengths, and the organization you're looking at or the company you're looking at's areas for growth. And that really means digging into the mission of the organization or the company. So that's a great place to start. Where is that company or organization right now? And where do they look to for growth? So asking about their strategic plan is perfectly understandable. And it's a really great idea for a young adult to think, these are my strengths. And does this meet the organization or the company I'm looking at's areas for growth? Another thing I think it's important to mention is not limiting your search or let anyone discourage you from your passions. And there are many, many stories. We're going to talk about some of them in this talk that, you may not even know a particular job exists, and you might be able to combine interests or passion areas that you don't even think are related to each other. But it's important to start talking to people, informational interviews. Anytime you have an opportunity to talk to somebody who's doing something really cool, it's a great time to jump on and do that. So really not limiting your search. Don't let anyone discourage you from your passions. Now, that doesn't mean that your passions will always make you money, but it might mean that your passion is the thing you do maybe in a volunteer position 2 nights a week while you have a day job that is actually putting groceries on your table. So it's something to think about. Target employers seeking neurodiverse candidates. And that's fairly idealistic, but these are some things that I do think young adults take for granted. So first of all, if you are a current college student, use your college career center. If you are a college graduate, you are an alumni of that college, use those career center opportunities as an alumni. They all exist and they are happy to help you. Any experience that you've had, it might be a high school, a summer learning experience. It might be a gap year experience. It might be a college experience, even a summer camp experience. All of those have alumni associations, or most of those have alumni associations. And that's something that many young adults overlook. They are actually alumni of usually a couple of different organizations or schools. And it's important to look back and ask, if they don't know already, is there an alumni network? I am interested, for example, in gaming design. Is there somebody in my summer camp community who's doing this? Is there somebody who graduated from my high school who's doing this? So really push those alumni connections. You worked hard to become an alumni of a school or a program, and it's important to use those connections. It's also important to look for a commitment to neurodiversity in the company's DEI mission. Now, unfortunately, many organizations lack emotional inclusion and flexibility. And so it's really important to be thoughtful. And yes, neurodiversity is something that is a type of diversity. It should certainly be in a company organization's mission, and it is increasingly being seen there. At the same time, that doesn't necessarily mean that emotional inclusion and flexibility are part of the job. And that's a little frustrating for young adults who think, I found this fantastic company. Their mission is all about diversity and all about different types of learners. But yet, when I get down to it, the emotional inclusion or the lack of emotional inclusion is something that's keeping me from feeling comfortable in the workplace. So it is a balance and something that young adults should be aware of. There are some companies, some big ones, Microsoft is one, Chevron is not one, that have specific neurodiversity hiring programs. And you don't have to look always to big companies for this, but bigger companies do have that. And so especially if you're interested in software design, if you're interested in engineering, in the math sciences, there are lots of neurodiversity hiring programs popping up at companies. It's also important to be really familiar with anonymous review sites. And sometimes as parents, because we're not really involved, or we shouldn't be involved in the day-to-day of our child's job search process, as much as maybe we were when they were younger, this is a great place for parents to kind of stay safely. And that's to use some of these anonymous review sites like Glassdoor to learn about the insider experience of neurodiverse employees who will actually talk about how their experience at their company was. And I think it's really, really important to become familiar with anonymous review sites. And as I mentioned, that's a great place that a parent can safely kind of step off to the side and gather some information. So if you're a young adult, your child has told you, here are 10 companies I'm interested in interning at or working at, that's something that we as parents can do. We can kind of look at those anonymous review sites of those companies and see what kind of reviews are there. Familiarizing yourself with job boards is also really important, and as well with job skills resources. And the best thing I think you can do when you're learning to analyze what jobs are out there and what might be good jobs for you is learn the best filters for what you want. And some of this relates back to what I said in the first couple of slides, which is making those lists of the deal breakers and the flexibilities. So think about the flexibilities, think about the filters that you need. Do you need a filter that is related to the time the job starts, or a virtual or a hybrid model, something where there's a lot of public speaking or no public speaking? So whatever those filters are, that is going to be a deal breaker for you, that's important to know. And you need to know the job language for that. So here are just a few suggestions. And please note, all of these slides will be coming to anybody who registered for this talk. So you don't have to take all this down. But inclusivity.com has something called success enablers. And those will show modifications in particular companies that they will say, we make modifications for the following specific issues. And they might say things related to diversity. They might say things related to neurodiversity. They might say things related to disabilities, etc. So it's a really great place to look. Untapped.com or untappedgroup.com/jobs is another place to look. Again, these are job boards, and they're going to kind of tell you what the job skills resources are. Interview prep, if you're not familiar with that, that's wonderful. It's interview preparation for neurodiverse candidates. And Autism Speaks has a great toolkit that can also help young adults, college grads who are looking for jobs. So those are just a few places to start. If you are not familiar with Chris Bonello's Autistic Not Weird, it's a fascinating book. And I thought it was important to kind of share this quote from his book with the audience. It's the candidate who performs best at the interview who gets the job. And that's why autistic people struggle too often to find employment. And I think it's really important. Again, this is his language, autistic people. That language doesn't necessarily work for everyone. But what he's saying here, and he says below on the bottom, it's not how well you can do the job, it's how well you can talk about doing the job. And for those of us who struggle with social emotional intelligence, we have issues maybe with social skills, that can be really, really challenging. So it's something to think about and it's something to practice. I'm going to talk a little bit about that. I would absolutely suggest Autistic Not Weird by Chris Bonello. It's a wonderful book, regardless if you identify as somebody who is autistic or not. Also, really, really important, and I'm sure you've heard this in all of the transitions of life, is don't go it alone. So if you are a young adult and you are neurodivergent and you do not have any neurodivergent role models or mentors, there are places to start. The ADDA, AANE, these are wonderful places to find role models and mentors. I'm assuming many of you already have them, but if you don't, those are places where professional mentors are happy to help. Employment career-specific pipelines for neurodivergent individuals are also great places to, kind of move forward and not do it alone. Auticon hires autistic tech professionals, for example, and matches them with existing jobs. So think about your areas of interest, where your academic areas lie, and think about ways that you can get help. Create your own pipeline on LinkedIn. LinkedIn has so many different abilities that many of us don't even know. Join professional networks, autistic professionals, neurodivergent creatives. Those are two that exist already. They're pipelines on LinkedIn. And as I mentioned earlier, use your alumni associations. That's an absolutely fantastic way to use LinkedIn. Anything you are an alumni of, any program, any school, use those places. If you were diagnosed with a learning disability or a learning difference before the age of 26, you might have more access to federal resources for job searches. So that's something that you should definitely look into with your state. And I would encourage you to seek out coaches and therapists specializing in career readiness. Some of us are wonderful and we sort of live in that college transition space, but we don't actually move into that college to career space. But there are specialists out there who are doing it, and it might be worth a one-on-one conversation. I think it's important to create a schedule for applying to jobs. Looking for a job can often be a full-time and pretty overwhelming job. And so as we say to many people who deal with neurodiversity-related issues and processing issues, really set bite-sized goals for yourself with breaks. Managing a reasonable schedule is really important for your search. And I would say have a backup plan too. So maybe a reasonable schedule is it's going to take me 4 months to find something, but my backup plan might be after 2 months, if nothing has happened, I'm going to get a small part-time job so I can just get into the habit of working. And that might be dog walking, it could be babysitting, it could be data entry, it could be working in a restaurant. It really doesn't matter what it is. If a student or a young adult or a young professional, college graduate has not really had that 9-to-5 workplace or even a 9-to-2 workplace, it's a great time to get started with that. So I do hear a lot, I'm going to give myself 6 months. And if I don't get something, then I will move into a job I don't really like. And I would actually discourage that. What I would say is give yourself smaller bite-sized goals, maybe a few months. And if nothing happens in your kind of path, take something else and get into the habit of knocking some of those professional skills you're unfamiliar with and knocking those out so you can start building a resume and have some idea of what it's like to have a job. Also focus on self-care. And you hear about this a lot, but it's really, really important during the process of applying for jobs and starting a job. Just like self-care was important when we start hearing back from colleges, this is a time, sadly, when a lot of people get a lot of rejections, and it can be very daunting. So be realistic about your self-care during the process of applying for jobs and during the process of starting a job. Know that it is not going to be smooth sailing every day. Hopefully it will be more smooth sailing than not. Knowing that you don't need to be perfect to be valuable, right? You can work and you can learn some skills, and maybe they're not skills that you were actually envisioning learning. But parents, this is a great opportunity for you to think back to the work experiences you've had, even part-time work experiences when you were younger, and share them with your young adults, right? Knowing you don't need to be perfect. You may have taken a few things from a job that you didn't expect to, right? You may work in a daycare center and learn about time management, learn how to deal with parents and kids and employers, but really not maybe connect with that particular career path. So we can gain professional skills from all different work environments. It's really important, regardless if you're in an ice cream parlor or you're in an office. Building resilience skills is also really important and a great thing to happen when you are, maybe getting rejection after rejection when you're applying for jobs. Letdowns and setbacks can really destroy kind of our ego, and it's important to build some of those resilience skills. And it's important to take stock of what you're learning, right? So maybe after 2 weeks of getting a couple of bummer rejections, you can actually sit down, maybe with a parent or guardian, and kind of think, have I built some resilience skills in the last 2 weeks? If I have, add them to my list of professional skills, because that's an important professional skill. And then remember that we can't control the thoughts and reactions of others. We can just control our own thoughts and actions and our own behaviors. We can hope for the best, but we really can't control the thoughts and actions of others. It's important to get professional help, and some of that professional help can be gotten through alumni associations and career centers. So I would say these are the 3 main ways that college career centers say that a young adult will be judged in the workplace: by their resume, by their cover letter writing, and by their interviewing skills. And of course, if you may not make it to the interviewing skills piece if the resume and the cover letter are not really polished. So resumes are all over the internet. There are a million different templates, and there are as well for cover letter writing. Some companies are stricter than others. If you are in an artistic field, you can be a little bit more flexible with your resume, with color and format, even with cover letters. If you are applying for a job in a Fortune 500 company, it's going to be much more templated. But regardless, it's important to make sure that your resume is in a proper format, and that you have had it read not only by a professional, that would be somebody who's actually does this for a living. Career Center is a good place to start, but by some other people as well, and not only people who know you well. So I would certainly say share your resume with family and friends, but then find an acquaintance and maybe trade resumes, because it's great when somebody doesn't know you all that well. They don't have that lead where they can say, yes, this looks like your personality. If you don't know somebody that well, the resume is an important place to kind of be that fly on the wall, taking a look at it. And of course, that's what's going to be coming across when you're entering a work environment. They don't know you and they're reading your resume. So you want to make sure that you come across in that resume. Most of the things that you'll read about resumes and all the templates out there, we'll talk more and more about how important it is, obviously, not to have any typos or grammatical mistakes, but to focus on measurables. And that is the one thing that you'll hear from any college career center, is your resume should focus on measurables. So if you did a job, what did you learn from that job? So for example, you may have been a camp counselor, and you might think, well, I'm interested in engineering. The camp counseling has nothing to do with engineering. Well, you'd be wrong, because you have learned tremendous communication skills if you were a camp counselor. You've learned resilience skills. You've learned independent thinking skills. You've learned negotiation skills. So really, it's important to think about all of the things that you have managed, all the things that you have handled, and think of those as transferable skills to another job. So certainly don't look down at the experiences you have. I see that a lot with kids who have been camp counselors or babysitters. Those are incredibly important skills. And those two examples, I mean, you've kept children alive. Those are pretty important skills right there. Cover letter writing is a little more rote and a little more standard. And once you have a solid cover letter that you feel good about, you can tweak that for lots of different jobs. The most important thing is to make sure that you are very, very, very careful that you pull out the name of the company and the name of the individual before you mistakenly switch somebody else's name for the next job you're applying for. I can't tell you how many situations I've been in the workplace where I have immediately thrown away a resume from a student, for example, on a college campus because they didn't have my name spelled correctly. And finally, interviewing skills. And we're talking a little bit about that in a few more slides, but it's also important to remember that interviewing skills are something that are online now. There are lots of different programs. College career centers have wonderful interviewing platforms where you'll have a fake interview, it'll be recorded, and then you'll actually have somebody that can help you analyze how you did in the interview and then try to better those skills for your next one. Also working on professional skills in terms of phone conversations, and this leaving voicemails and talking on the phone are something that a lot of young people today struggle with. This is a texting generation. They're fast with their fingers, but phone skills can be a little bit overwhelming. And leaving voicemails is something that makes a lot of people nervous. So if you are a young professional heading out into the workplace and you are not comfortable on the phone, it is time to hone those skills. And you can practice them as much as possible, right? You should be making your own doctor's and dentist appointments. Those are opportunities to have phone conversations. Leave voicemails if you're looking for informational interviews, or even calling an aunt or uncle and leaving a voicemail. It's important rather than texting. Practice doing that because they're going to be important in the workplace, especially if you're uncomfortable with that. Practicing is a great idea. A lot of colleges or even high schools are now teaching how to send professional emails. But if that is not a skill that you know, it's important that you play with that as well and you really hone those skills. So when we go back to our first slide and we start thinking about all of these skills that, what do I need to work on? Sending a professional email is one that is not only easily accessible online, there's great templates out there, but it's something that you really need to know how to do, and somebody can proofread those for you. Your elevator pitch is something that if you were in college, you may already have worked on. If not, it's important to think about maybe a 4-sentence elevator pitch. And that is what you're interested in and what kind of job you'd like to get. And I think that's really it. Usually it's a couple sentences about yourself and a couple sentences about what you'd like to do. Think about the language you are using when you create your elevator pitch. It's important also to question, and there's no right or wrong answer, but do you disclose a disability or a learning difference in your elevator pitch? And certainly some people do, and some people choose not to. That is completely your call. I would say an elevator pitch is something that you can create, you can type up, and then you can memorize. And it really should be as long as an elevator ride. When somebody says, tell me a little bit about yourself, bam, you've got your elevator pitch. When somebody says, tell me what your job you're interested in, what do you hope to do? Bam, you've got your elevator pitch. So those are things you can start right away. It's never too early to begin your elevator pitch. Know that your elevator pitch can be tweaked, and it can move and groove as you age and you learn different things about yourself and about the career. But it's an incredibly important tool to have in your toolkit when you're job searching. And then, especially if this is challenging for you, practice asking questions of others, especially if social interaction really is something that just doesn't feel comfortable to you. You, in a job interview, are certainly asked a lot of questions, and you can certainly practice answering questions. But inevitably, there's always a time when they say, do you have any questions for us? And it's really important to ask questions of others. Now, those questions are really for 2 different reasons. One is it's going to give you some of the answers you want. And the other is that people really enjoy speaking about themselves, and you'll learn a lot in the process. There's nothing wrong, especially if you're having an informational interview with somebody who's already kind of in your dream job, to say, can you tell me a little bit about your career path? And let them talk maybe about the turns in the road that they took. Working on interpersonal skills that might be challenging. So things like reducing anxiety, bolstering self-advocacy skills, building confidence in yourself, learning how to read other people, speaking and listening skills. And I would say this last one here, taking a beat before a response, is the best advice I was ever given in the job interview world, and something I like to pass on to young people. Sometimes we are so ready with an answer that we don't take a breath. And it's really important to take a beat before a response. So if you're in an interview, an informational interview or a professional interview, and you're asked a question, literally take a beat and then answer the question. It gives you time to breathe, excuse me, and it gives you time to really be planful about what you're going to say. It's also important to interview the interviewers, right? If there is no neurodiversity program in place at a particular company or organization, ask the hiring manager speaking with, how does your management team adapt to different learning styles or different communication styles? How do you meet the needs of neurodivergent employees? If there is not a positive response, that doesn't mean throw that company off your radar screen. Don't give up. Be prepared with follow-up questions about communication methods and work styles. It's also important to know that there might already be an inclusive culture in a workplace, but there might not be the vocabulary for that culture. And I would say, if anything that you're hearing this evening, that is probably the most important thing I can say to a new college grad who's heading out in the workplace. There may very well be an inclusive culture in a workplace, but they, as a group, or even the HR department, might not have the vocabulary for it. And it's important not to be turned off just because people use the wrong words or terms. And I think that's something really important to think about. Now I want to shift a little bit in the remaining time I have left to the parent's role in this young adult's transition to independence. And of course, there are stages. So what I'd like you to do is take a look at those four circles on the left with the P and the YA and the two blank circles on the bottom. And I want you to think about this as a car driving forward or upward. The parent in this situation is the driver. That's the P. The young adult is the passenger, front seat passenger, sitting next to the parent. So that's the two front seats of the car. And the two back seats are empty. Okay, now I want you to think about the other car, the other drawing on the right side, where the young adult is driving and the parent is out of the car completely. This is a mistake that I think we make time and time again. I think we make this mistake when we are helping kids transition from high school to college and from college to the world beyond. I think we believe that there is a very short run from the parent driving and the kid sitting next to us in the passenger seat to flipping it and that young adult driving and the parent out of the car. But in fact, there are many, many stages. And this is an important time for parents when you have a young adult who struggles with maybe neurodiversity challenges, processing issues, to think about the different stages in your relationship with your child and your interaction with your child. So for example, maybe in the first car, this is the car that has to do with professional communication. And the parent can say, you know what, young adult, maybe you're not ready to fully drive that car, but I'm going to actually move to the back seat and you're going to kind of come over and do the driving, but I'm still in the car. Maybe I'm even in the car on the back right, so I can still kind of watch you drive. And it might be another skill where the parent says, I'm ready to be out of the car. Kid, you've got this. There might be a car that looks just like the car on the left. Even though it's the young adult ready, heading into the world of work, the parent might still be driving that car. We have to be a little kinder to ourselves and our relationships with our kids. So we're not going from dependent to independent overnight. Our kids don't get a college degree and all of a sudden they become adults. So I want you to think about the different pieces of the puzzle and the different ways your child, or if you're a young adult yourself, what are your strengths and what are your weaknesses? So maybe you've got some skills completely down pat, and you've got other skills where you're kind of working people's roles in the car. And you can actually take this and think about it. You can discuss it as a parent with your child or your young adult. And you can say, I feel in this particular situation, maybe in cover letter writing, this is kind of where I am in the car. Where can I be in the car? Where can you be in the car? Do I have to step up or should I step back? Should I step out of the car completely? And then break it down into different chunks. How about this? Interpersonal skills. Where are we in the car with this one? And what are we aiming for? So moving around in that fictitious car is really, really important. But just remember, that's a really big jump from the parent as driver and the young adult as passenger to the parent completely out of the car and the young adult driving the car. There are many stages along the way, and we do need to be thoughtful and kind to ourselves about that. So how to do this? I'm going to end with this. Because the process can feel overwhelming, break it down. So number one, parent and adult child ideally go through these slides. Each slide makes a separate, each parent and each adult child makes a separate list of what professional or job skills they believe need work. Kid makes the list for themselves. The parent makes the list for what they believe that their child or young adult needs work on. Then they sit together and compare their lists and condense those two lists into one list. What's interesting in that second stage, when I've done these exercises in people's homes and with parents and young adults, some of those things are absolutely on both lists, right? A parent and that young adult might know for sure that that young adult is struggling with X, but a student or a young adult might feel very confident in something that the parent doesn't realize they do feel confident in, or vice versa. So it's important to create lists, sit together and think about what I do well, what needs work, and compare those lists. Number three, decide together who will be the best match for teaching, editing, or practicing whatever's on that list. It's really important to remember that the parent should not be the teacher of every one of these tasks. So maybe you have an older sibling, or you have an aunt, or you have an academic coach, or you have a mental health practitioner who can help you with a particular task, and that's not the role for the parent. It's really important that somebody is there to offer guidance, but it should not always be the parent. Think about people who do things well. They could be a neighbor, they could be a relative, they could be a professional. And then ideally set time and goals for each task. And as I mentioned earlier, sometimes it takes a while to find a great job. So remember that perfection does not have to be the goal before a job search. It should be learning along the way, picking up professional skills, and hopefully heading into a career path. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Andrea. That was chock full of really fabulous information.
Thank you.
Really appreciate that. Now, Cheryl, I think, has volunteered to sort of handle some questions. If anybody has questions and you want to offer them in the chat, Cheryl is going to share them with Dr. Brenner. But I'm also sure that if you had any questions you wanted to just, say out loud, it would be okay if you, raised your hand and we could give you the opportunity to actually talk. Cheryl, what do we have?
Well, let's see. Sorry, I had a sneezing fit right before I supposed to do this. Hopefully it's over. What do you recommend for college when parents are being shut out of the process when your child has learning differences? So I'm assuming the student is shutting the parents out. And so this is a different question from the talk. It's about what they recommend for college.
What they recommend for college search process? Is that the question?
Oh, the school is shutting parents out. This is clarified. I don't think the school can talk to the parents. I think they have to talk to the students, right, Andrea?
If it's a college they're speaking about, yes, unless you've signed a FERPA waiver, the school is by federal law unable to talk to parents about their students' academics, about their mental health, about pretty much anything, for sure. So that's always tough, and it's always a balance between deciding if you're going to sign a FERPA waiver or not. But that's really, it's really quite a challenge, because the college looks at students as young adults who are able to handle, should be able to handle their academics and their social emotional health. Not always the case.
Right. Other questions?
I have a question.
Go ahead, Whitney.
Yeah. Yes, thanks. I'm watching because my daughter was unable, and she's going to be graduating from college, and she's a musician. She also has a lot of other academic interests, but that's what she mostly focused on because that was fit really well with her ADHD. So my question is, how do you guide a student, someone in that position, to their first job? I mean, musician is kind of a leap, but you know, she'll hopefully have some help with that. But I was taking to heart what you said about finding a secondary job to hold you over while you're learning those skills, because of course musicianship is something that can be a very circuitous path.
Absolutely.
And also a very self-managed path. So that's going to be interesting. But I'm curious, because she has not had a job, partly because of COVID, partly because of her ADHD. You know, what kind of breakthrough jobs are good in general for folks who are in 22 years old and is now starting?
Right. It's a great question. And I would, you know, there's so many things in every field. I mean, certainly musicianship is something that she could be teaching. She could, you know, have some music clients off to the side. She could be working with a company, for example, that edits music videos. She could be, you know, working for an event space that books jazz musicians. You know, I think it's kind of anything adjacent to the world is wonderful to build a resume. And so if music is her love, and that is what she wants to be involved in, I would say, you know, that is a search term, literally, filter for anything related to music, and being willing to kind of say, I've danced around all of these different music areas, honing different skills. So maybe it would be teaching, maybe it would be time management skills, but everything kind of has this music connection in some way that will end up really honing a solid looking music resume, even if it's not all in music performance. So that would be my advice. Of course, you know, every family is different, every student's path is different, but there's no reason that people can't be pursuing their passion area and their expertise area, academic or professional, and you know, just in an adjacent way. And I can't tell you how many music related young adult resumes I've seen over the years. And I think, wow, you know, it could be anything from teaching violin to, you know, again, as I mentioned, you know, booking a jazz musician for an event planning company. So there's lots of different ways to do it. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you.
Okay, we have another question in the chat. How do you recommend neurodivergent young adults seek out learning necessary life skills that they are not able to learn from their parents?
Well, I think that there are lots of different groups to join. I gave some of them in the talk, and I think those are great places to start. If that young adult can find a mentor who shares some of the same or has shared some of the same challenges, I think it's really, really important to have a non-parent professional mentor that can help them. And if you're a young professional who's nervous about kind of the standing around the water cooler conversing with people, and you have you have an adult in your life who can say, I was successful in a workplace that was challenging for me too. Here are some tips and tricks. Doesn't mean, you know, completely avoid a workplace that does have social interaction. That's a great place to go. So I would say lots of those LinkedIn groups are a really wonderful place to start. And then again, the slides will be sent to people, but some of those job listings, all of those filters are great places. So the more the merrier. And parents, if you have neurodiverse adults in your life, or you can certainly reach out to wonderful organizations like Chad for advice. There are people waiting in the wings willing to help, even if it's not exactly in the same field. It can be an informational interview just about social interaction in the workplace. It doesn't have to be the same academic or professional path.
Great answer. Thanks. The next question is, what are your recommendations regarding living arrangements after college while looking for work? So I guess they're not making an income yet. Should they move back with their parents, live with friends or strangers? What are the types of living arrangements?
I mean, this is the danger of a single story. Every student is different. There are lots of successful kids who live with friends. There are kids who live in group houses that have similar to some gap year programs like the Dynamy program. There are programs that are there for young professionals where they might have kind of like an RA environment with somebody coming in and just making sure everything's okay, but the kids are still doing their own shopping and cooking and going to work or school and coming back. It really depends what your students' strengths are. I've certainly known kids who have gone and become au pairs or nannies for families. Lived with relatives rather than parents if parents are not a great option. Depends how big the home is, what the living environment is, what the communication or transportation is. You know, it's really all over the place. And I would not say there's a single story at all. I've seen many successes with kids moving back home, and I've seen kids who really did not benefit from moving back home.
Okay, lots of different options there. This looks like this. Okay, this is a different question. What advice would you give to an adult with ADHD who takes stimulant medication for managing symptoms that only last 8 hours, who wants to go in a career with long hours and uncertain shifts, such as paramedic or nurse? Would they be able to ask for accommodations for shorter shifts or only shifts during the day?
That is not my expertise. I am not a clinician. I can pass it on to those of you who are.
Okay. Does anyone have any ideas about that? Is anyone here who's a clinician who has experience? Okay, sorry, we can't answer that question. Does anyone else have a question? That's the last one in the chat room.
Can I just ask, what is the most difficult in your experience, the most difficult aspect for a lot of people, for a lot of kids? I know that coming from a background of having differences means that on the one hand, my daughter is really every time she accomplishes anything, it's like she had to climb the mountain twice to get there. So she should feel proud of that, but it's also discouraging, as you know. And so I'm like, what do you see as the most common complaint or concern that might drive that poor kid into a hole of their own making and want to never come out? And also, what kind of advice as a parent, what kind of advice as a parent can I give in those circumstances?
Yeah, it's a great question, Whitney, and I have a lot of different answers, and I don't know if any of them are going to be helpful, but I'm going to try. One of the biggest shifts from the world of college to the world of work is that we move from a very irregular schedule to a very regular schedule. And for a lot of kids who struggle with time management and processing and schedules, that actually is a welcome change. So that's something to think about. You probably have a child who's come out of a college where they might have, Wednesday night classes and no classes on Tuesday and Monday they're busy all day, and then all of a sudden they have a job that looks much more like a 9 to 5, 9 to 1, whatever it might be, with regular hours. The other thing is they have more free time when they're in the world of work than they may have had before. They're not necessarily bringing work home. There's no homework. And so being prepared for that, I think, is really important. And I think it's why it's important to kind of have some smaller little bite-sized jobs you can get, kids can get into the habit of whatever that is. And, ideally something that has regular hours. Nothing is going to happen overnight. The college degree is not going to miraculously give our kids, all of the accomplishments that they want. They're not going to, all of a sudden be able to manage time management well, if that's been a challenge for them. But they're going to have to learn it differently in the workplace than they did in the college environment. And there really are a lot of positives. A lot of neurodiverse individuals, especially those who can relate socially to others, do extremely well in the world of work, where college actually is sometimes more of a struggle. College seems to many students like it is a constant battle, because there's a constant, as you mentioned, hill to climb, something new. And the world of work is a little different. You may have a project and it might look very similar to a project that you just accomplished. It might be in a different with a different focus, but it's still, this is a group, this is how we form, this is how the time management works, this is what a presentation looks like. So it's a little more rote. So if you have a kid who actually does well once there is a pattern, the world of work can actually be very rewarding.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Lisa Schwartz raised her hand. Go ahead, Lisa.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm here as a parent of a son who's in a 5th year of his college experience. Hopefully will graduate in May. And I hear everything you're telling me, or everything you've said. I feel like I've said to my son, but he's really struggling to believe me. He's finishing college feeling like he has no skills. He doesn't understand how he's going to be marketable to any, companies. And I wonder if you have any suggestions as to how to really
Lisa, I don't know
feel more comfortable.
I don't know if he's comfortable using the career center at his college, but that is a resource that is overlooked. And not only because they can help with things like the obvious things like a cover letter, but what they can do is they can draw out of a student who feels like they don't have transferable skills, those transferable skills. So I had mentioned, the camp counselor as an example. It's something that's hard for everybody, regardless if it's a neurodivergent individual or not, to kind of feel like, do I know anything? What can I do? And so I would say that's a great place to start. And really maybe sitting down with them, and maybe you're not the person, I'm not the person as a parent to do this, and maybe it's another trusted adult to help kind of draw out some of those skills. There are lots of lists online of transferable skills. And if you want to email me directly, I can send some to you that come up in the workplace that students and parents often overlook. That they don't seem like they're necessarily in a job listing or a list of responsibilities, but they're absolutely crucial in the workplace. And it just is how we talk about it. If you think back to when you helped your kid apply to college and you were maybe going through the Common App and you were kind of figuring out how to talk about the things that they did. Right. And so that might be an organization that they're a part of, or an organization that they started, or how many hours of trombone they played every week. It's not necessarily what they did, but how we actually can talk about what they did. And that's something that our kids need a lot of help with. So I would say use the Career Center, use other adults in their life to help draw these things out. Your student absolutely has more transferable skills than they see. And that's a very normal reaction for a college student to say that.
Great, thank you.
Of course.
Okay. Does anyone else have a question?
Well, perhaps we should wrap up. I had a little moment of technical difficulty, so I apologize if I missed something, but I'm back and my computer appears to be working. Thank you, Dr. Brenner, so much for this really informative talk, which I'm sure was incredibly helpful for lots of parents and people who are coming out of college and trying to figure out what they're supposed to do next. So thank you so
My
much.
pleasure. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
I want to remind folks that we do have 2 more lectures that are part of our resource fair for the month of October. So next week we have John Thomas, who's going to be speaking on ADHD in the workplace. So career fit, interface, and resolution. And again, that'll be on Tuesday, which is the usual night for our lectures, starting at 7:30 until 9 o'clock. And then the following week on October 24th, we are welcoming Dr. Michelle Mullally, and she'll be speaking to us about the importance of assessing and treating anxiety and trauma and understanding ADHD symptoms. So would love to have you all join us. You can register on Eventbrite. We're going to send out the slides. Is that accurate, Dr. Brenner?
Yes, absolutely.
Wonderful. So we'll be sending that to everybody who attended here and everybody who registered. And with that, we'll say good night, everyone. Thank you so much. Hope to see you next time.
Good night.